So now that we have our website being served up through CloudFront and S3, what happens if we want to make a change to our website? The option we have is to repeat the initial process of going to the bucket and using the upload process, which can be quite tedious. In order for us to do this in a much easier way, we want to set up a credential locally in our terminal. And to do that, we're going to set up a IAM user. So let's go to IAM, and I like to pin these services so that it can be easily accessible. Open up IAM. And before I create a user, I'll go ahead and create a group. And this is a nifty way to group users, whether you have developers or just yourself. So let's create a group, and this can be called anything. I'm going to call it the developer group. And I want to give that group a policy. Since this would be a developer, I'm going to give it the admin policy, and you can search all the way down, search through admin and give it administrator access. Make sure that is selected and it create group. And let's just double check if the developer group has the permission. So if we go back to developer and you check permission, you should see, and this should give us access to S3 and all the services that we need from the CLI. The next thing is to actually create a user. So go over to users, and we can create a user. I already have one created. I'm going to call this user web developer. This can be any name. And now we have two types of access. One is programmatic access, which is what we want from the CLI or from the SDK. And the next set of access would give the user access to the web portal itself. But we want to keep this programmatic access. Let's go through the permission, and we want to put it in the developer group. We could have added the permission directly to the user, but I find groups an easier way to categorize, go through this process. And it creates user. Now the final step is to actually add these credentials to your machine. In my case, I'm using the Docker remote desktop. So I'm gonna copy these down. You may want to download this. Try to keep this private. Matter of fact, after this video, I'll go ahead and delete this, because anyone with this access can create and delete services in your AWS account. So go to, while this is still open, or you can download the CSV file. I'll go back to the AWS CLI. And remember, when I set up my development environment, I also installed the AWS CLI, and I'm using version 2.7. So let me clear this. And what we need to do is create a profile. Now you may have, let's say you're working on multiple projects with multiple AWS accounts. You can name these profile to keep them isolated. So what I'll do is I'll create a profile with a name of choice. So you issue AWS configure and profile, and then the name of the profile. And I'm going to call this profile developer. And this can be any name as long as you remember the name, right? Now it will ask you for your access key, and that's when you want to go out and grab these values. So I'm going to copy and paste this in. I'm going to do the same for the secret key. Next thing it will ask is for my default region. I am in US East 1, and if you want to check based on your location, you can look at which data center is closer to you. I'm in closer to US East. And hit enter, and that creates the profile. Now while the profile is created, it's not actually in use yet, and we can test this. So if we say, let's say we want to list the S3 buckets in our account, so it would be AWS S3 LS, and you should get a message saying unable to locate credentials. So what you need to do is to actually export this credential. So we're going to say export AWS profile equal the name of the profile we just created right here. Once that, to see if the profile is actually activated. Let's try that command again. There we go. We can see the bucket. There's a ton of utilities and documentation out there you can find around the AWS CLI. Another way to check if the session is active is to call the identity, and you'll see which profile. And this is useful if you have multiple profile. You want to check which one is active. So now we can issue a bunch of commands to the S3. So again, we see by issuing AWS S3 ls, we're able to list the bucket. What if we want to list the content of the bucket? So I'm going to go ahead and clear this, and I'll do another AWS S3 ls, this time with the bucket name. And here we go. These are all the contents of the bucket. So now that we have this set up, one nifty way to do this is we can actually add a command in the script section to push the files to S3 anytime we do a build.